Hello and welcome. My name is Barkha Dutt. You're watching the Mojo Story. We are on the ground, on the road with the pandemic. As all of you know, we have been tracking the COVID story from across India, bringing you voices from the ground. But even as we try and focus on what we think the country should be talking about, which is the massive mismatch between the official reported COVID deaths and the actual deaths that are taking place sometimes quietly in villages that aren't even being documented, even as we should be talking about Indians that are dying unacknowledged and uncounted. In Delhi, instead, the government seems to be focused on an ongoing battle with Twitter. Today, the social network platform Twitter seemed to lose its intermediary status. What does that mean? It means that Twitter can no longer enjoy legal cover from prosecution for content that's posted by its users. For this, in the first of its kind, such FIR, Twitter is now facing a criminal case involving the alleged assault on a Muslim man in Uttar Pradesh, a case that has been countered by the UP police. Twitter finds itself named in that first information report, along with journalists and opposition leaders. The minister involved in this particular case, overseeing Twitter and its freedoms, Ravi Shankar Prasad, did say that Twitter had been given many different opportunities to comply but had missed that chance. Let me welcome to the program now Mishi Chaudhry, who's one of the foremost experts on the program. Can we bring her up in the screen? All right, let me actually do that. There's Mishi. Mishi is joining us from New York, and like I said, she's the foremost expert in this space. And Mishi, if you had to just explain to people what this actually means in better language than I have, could you actually explain what's going on?
Sure, thank you. I think I couldn't agree more that it's somehow has become a public theater between Government of India and these social media platforms when we should be concentrating on the pandemic. What actually this means is that it is too much of noise for basically nothing. The legal cover or the safe harbor provision is not a registration like a trademark registration or something that Twitter forgot to renew, or it can be decided by either the ministry or the minister or anybody else that for X by X date, you're going to just lose this safe harbor. So I think there's a lot of information which is now floating about a matter which doesn't really make any sense. What this means is like all over the world, there is a consensus that if you and I are creating some content on one of these platforms, you speak on Twitter, I speak on Facebook, and if it is unlawful, then I am the person who should be responsible for it. And all the governments, in different ways, adopting different methods, decided that if we were going to hold companies responsible for such a thing, then the companies will never be able to exist in business because then they will only be fighting these kind of cases all around. US adopted one model which is much more liberal. India adopted a model which is conditional, which says that you'll have to follow certain kind of due diligence rules, and then you will have this legal protection. Like you showed the FIR, this is not the first time actually one of these companies has been implemented. They have been fighting in various courts in a lot of places. And what happens is when a matter comes up in court, then the Twitter's lawyer will stand up and say, my lord, what is happening here is that I have been given a safe harbor protection in the law itself. I did not create this content. I did not do anything about it. And if a court order came to me or a government order came to me that there is a problem and this content is unlawful, I took it down. And that's it. That was all I had to do. I have nothing to do with it. So that is what the safe harbor is. There is no loss of legal shield. There's nothing at all. It is a legal concept decided by judges, decided by courts. The ministry has nothing to do with it. Yes, there's a ton of confusion about these IT rules, the new ones which have come up. And there's also a lot of speculation. Last week, we heard about the fact that, oh, these are going to be banned from India. I think what they're being simplified and presented in the public narrative to mostly divide the public opinion. It requires much more nuance. And and I also think the current requirements in these rules, some of them are unconstitutional. There's a lot of ambiguity, and there is a desire to control the narrative using these rules and to also control access of information. So to me, this is a manufactured storm, which really means nothing in law or in facts.
When you say it's a manufactured storm, let me just put you on mute while I ask my question. When you say it's a manufactured storm, how do you see this storm waning? Storms usually have an outburst and then the sun shines again. And when you say it's theater, do you actually think that Twitter has played some part in this theater as well? And let me just unmute you before you answer. Go ahead.
I do think that it's not a thing just the government. The government is obviously participating in it, and I think the companies themselves have some explaining here to do. When they take down content or they block anything, usually there is very little transparency about what they're taking down, why they are taking down. In the past few weeks, we've definitely seen a lot more information which is coming to people, but they have in the past done a lot of this blocking of information, blocking of tweets, etc., without giving much information and giving a transparency around it. They've also said a lot of times we're just a sales office, and you will have to get and talk to our California counterpart and implead them. When they play this Lex Loci server game, as I would call it, and then they say, oh my God, the location of our servers is different, or we're just a sales office, then it becomes very difficult to come to their defense, even if it is legitimately so. If you are in a country and you are going to monetize from that country and you're going to operate in that country, then you can't claim when there is a dialogue which is requested that I'm only merely a sales office. So that is why I say that the lack of transparency and accountability on behalf of the companies, the continued insistence that we are a sales office and you have to get and talk to our California offices, makes every discussion here a little disingenuous. And that is why both of these parties are now playing it out as users watch it from the sidelines while the fat cats are trying to cut a deal.
I'm I'm sure you followed the FIR that Twitter is facing, and that is for a Muslim man in Uttar Pradesh who actually says that he was assaulted and made to say Jai Shri Ram. And later, the Uttar Pradesh police said that this was not a communal case as had been reported by sections of the media and the opposition. And in fact, Hindus and Muslims were both involved in the attack on him, and it concerned some commercial dispute. So for having users post this on their platform, do you think Twitter was accountable? And it would be, of course, interesting to see whether Twitter now orders everybody to remove this content.
I think that is the entire crux of why we went to the Supreme Court in the Shreya Singhal Mouthshut matter to discuss these things. When the Supreme Court said, well, we can't rely on these companies to decide and adjudicate what is legal and what is illegal. It takes courts forever to decide if something is defamatory or if there's a problem here. The example you're giving right now, it's only an FIR for right now. And how are we supposed to expect, and do we even want so much of a power given to a private platform to decide what is legal, what is illegal here? What is happening here in this FIR, certain media organizations have also been implemented. These new rules have created something called another category, which is publishers of news and current affairs content. Exactly the platform we are speaking on, your platform. We've seen how much more platforms like these bring to the public the exact information they require, whether it is on ground reporting or something which traditional media has failed to do. We've seen the success of these independent platforms. So we want many of these to be able to exist. Now, to use a subordinate legislation, which doesn't even get discussed in the parliament, which has never been discussed in the parliament because parliament is not met, and to try to jam in whatever one wants to say we want to bring all of these platforms at the same level tells us a little bit more about the desire to control the narrative rather than actually solve the problem, which they say is misinformation. Now, ostensibly, these rules are supposed to address the issue of misinformation, all the fake news, as one calls it. I would really be interested that if we really want to address that problem, then we should be doing something different and not try to control what people speak in an ultra vires of a constitutional way. And all of us know that if actually we were to trace the sources of this misinformation, it will lead us to mostly political party actors. All political parties are involved in some ways or the other. So to say that, oh, we are trying to do this, we want to just address all of these issues here, and this FIR or any FIR, I have represented clients, we've seen and received information. There are numerous complaints and various kind of cases which are there in several courts. Companies are often added in those complaints, and then what happens is they exactly go to the court and said, we have got nothing to do with it. Other people were sharing it, whether it's right or wrong. Your law of this country says if we receive a court order or if we receive a communication from the government in a written form, in a reasoned order saying, remove this because it's against the law, and we removed it. That's it. That's all you have told us to do. That's all the law is. Then why are you now getting us involved into a lot of other things? And that also tells us that if this is the kind of cases companies will always be doing, these large American companies will have big legal teams. They can spend the money. The new people are not going to be able to spend the money. And to me, again, I think that the nuance is destroyed when we play it out in the public. Do you want the government to control the narrative or not? Do you want Twitter to follow the Indian rules or not? It's much more complicated, and there are several layers of it. We're talking about legal concepts like secondary liability, the vicarious liabilities, etc. And that's why I would say that the public theater should stop. People can go back to the drawing board and come up with laws that work to address actual concerns of the government, keeping in mind what our rights are. We shouldn't be bothered about what we can say where, and newspapers and mediums should not be bothered about reporting on something. If it is wrong, they can issue a correction. But that doesn't mean that we should now take it to court for that.
Let me ask you this: if you were to see the two recent big fights between Twitter and the government, one was on sort of adding the description "manipulated media," which the BJP took great objection to because it involved their supporters and their politics. And the second is this very disturbing report out of Uttar Pradesh, where, as I mentioned, a Muslim man says that he's been assaulted, and the original representation of the ground report is that he's been, this is a hate crime. And the police says, and it takes to Twitter, by the way, to say that, and it rebuts every such post that it sees. The UP police then tweets saying it's not a communal case. It's a case of locals being angry with this man for selling fake charms. Now, when you look at both of these are both deeply political standoffs when it comes to the BJP's politics. How do you actually read them? How do you read them? Sorry. Let me unmute you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm glad that you pointed it out that private platforms and everybody else is now being pulled into something which looks like a political fight. I understand that and appreciate the fact that many of these platforms have democratized how we discuss things, how we report on various matters, etc. But all of that has also contributed to certain things which we took for granted, where people took a pause to do some analysis, and the usual course to there is some benefit for that usual course to kick in, like police trying to litigate a matter on Twitter itself sounds completely, from my point of view at least, it it sounds irresponsible for Twitter to come and talk about it and for everybody to chime in and give their hot takes on it, because that's the story which is trending on a day, tells us that the society is losing out because of the nuanced destruction machine which is social media. Now, it's absolutely right. Everybody is playing this political theater here. Now, if, for example, the government is very serious about the fact that we want to address misinformation, then the rules actually say that any platform should label or at least inform its users if something is patently false and untrue. And these are the exact terms they use. And they say, and if it is written or published in any form with the intent to mislead. So if Twitter decides to label something, then they should just be allowed to label it based on facts. It should be allowed to label on whatever analysis Twitter or any other platform has done, and say, okay, we determine this seems manipulated, it's patently false. Our way to tell our users is that we put this label out there. And we can talk a lot about how Twitter decided to only start doing it in June 2020 when Donald Trump was on his way out, and didn't do it earlier because engagement on the platform means more revenue for these platforms. We can have that discussion for sure, why these companies are invested in that kind of content as well. But just to stay on the point about the fact that the law requires right now, as these rules currently stand, that you must tell your users that something is patently false. Then, if the recipient of that kind of conduct, if it is your own functionary, then it is, and we can dispute that. If it can be between Mr. Patra, who may find it objectionable, and then write to Twitter and fight it out. You've had that issue, other people have had that issue, I've personally had that issue, that Twitter is taking down content or doing something with our accounts, but that's between us as a private party and Twitter as another private party. We can't forget that these are private platforms who are now playing a much important role in our public discourse, but still they are not the government. They are not supposed to be protecting our rights. That's the government's job to do it. Now, that could have been between Mr. Patra and Twitter, and we could have fought it out. For the government then to step in the middle and try to make statements, and then the optics of the entire police raid on a Twitter's closed office for something which is routinely done. Police always send Section 91 Criminal Procedure Code notices and other such things about to say we would require more information, we would require more documents because we are investigating something. That's routine. But to come in the evening with media present and all of that speaks to much more of, again, to refer to the same term, of that we are trying to play out something for other people's consumption. And again, feed the platform by creating theater. And so I'm finding it a little hard to believe, oh, we want to address misinformation, but if you're going to address misinformation by somebody who we are interested in, somehow government should step in. I think government should keep doing what it needs to do. There is definitely a requirement to address misinformation, and there's also a requirement for these companies to be regulated and made more accountable. But this is an immature way of doing it.
Would you say this is an example of government overreach, and has the government been extremely selective in the kind of fake news it is fake news in quotes, because sometimes that's contestable, that it has sought intervention on? And in the end, how do you see this resolving itself? Twitter has said it's now appointing a compliance officer. So where do you see this going from here? And would you describe it as an example of government overreach?
So I'm a little surprised about the fact that when there are court cases pending in various high courts here, then the government decides to actually respond through either tweets or letters, etc. The matter is in courts. They have lawyers there. They should represent their side of the story there. That doesn't mean that the negotiations about what is happening should stop. I'm sure they're continuing. I'm sure we've seen that the parliamentary JPC has also there's a committee. They've also asked Twitter for certain responses, etc. So the fact that this continue to play it out this way it doesn't serve an actual purpose other than the fact that the debate and the distraction keeps alive. How Twitter, they should have a compliance officer. I think there is an actual issue about the fact that people are not able to reach these companies and they're constantly met with some automated responses, or to rely on their political or other kind of, as we say, if you know somebody and then you can call up someone and then you can perhaps get an answer somewhere. I think that's a wrong way to address issue. The companies must do something. The major problem here is to provide for this, as Rule 7 says, criminal liability for their employees. That is why companies are struggling with the fact that if Mishi Chaudhry says something defamatory online and X person is appointed as Twitter's representative, and you want to throw to basically choke in that sense, or find somebody responsible, and you make that person criminally responsible. And as you see in this FIR, we are watching that it will happen even at a much larger scale than it has happened in the past. Then it becomes an actual concern of the businesses. How are we going to protect our employees? There are thousands and billions of tweets or other content which is uploaded on YouTube, on Facebook, on WhatsApp, or various other platforms. How will they monitor all of this if their employees are responsible? World over, everybody is trying to address this issue. There are huge fines they are imposing. They are also thinking of certain other ways how can they actually address the matter. Nobody is imposing criminal liability on employees of the companies. That in fact defeats the purpose for which this IT Act exists, and the immunity, the question you started with, that whether they lose that legal shield or the safe harbor or the intermediary liability protection. That is why in 2008, the parliament, in its wisdom, had enacted this, because Avnish Bajaj for the Bazi.com case had been personally held responsible for something someone else was selling on his platform. That's why the parliament said India wants to be a player in the internet market. We want to be an e-commerce player, and people will not be able to start businesses if they're constantly being responsible for what users are doing on their platform. Now, if through these rules you make an employee responsible, then you're defeating the purpose for which this exists. You're also defeating the wisdom of the parliament through subordinate legislation. So I think we're losing that sight of why something exists, what should be done, and we're throwing the kitchen sink through these rules. We are saying we will also control what Netflix shows, what Amazon Prime shows. We will also control what online news media will do, and we will all do it through the subordinate legislation.
I have to close, so let me just ask you in the end, how where do you see this dispute going from here? Do you think in this theater it's just a little bit of, as they say in Hindi, tu tu me, and it'll resolve pretty fast, or do you actually see this as being a major clash, which could change the way people use Twitter or the way Twitter operates in India?
So, because the rules are obviously in courts now, and there are several high courts which are now seized of the matter, I see that there's a very high likelihood that all these matters are clubbed together and they go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has handled this and addressed these issues in 2015 through the Shreya Singhal and Mountchet judgment, and they will now have to do it again. So that major aspect of the rules happens there. I do not see these public statements, etc., and the desire to divide the public opinion stopping anytime soon. And whether it is through sources or whatever, these discussions, I think, will continue. I will also
Yeah.
say that the global audience is watching. India is a very, very important part, and these issues are no longer easily extricable from what one says on the international stage. We just saw the G7 statement. We've talked about politically motivated internet shutdowns.
I was just going to say, India supported that statement.
Absolutely. And India is the shutdowns capital of the world. The internet shutdowns.in tracker tells us that we have been leading in number of shutdowns. And when we say what we say at the global stage, people are going to keep asking us the question, then what are you really doing at home? So
Absolutely.
this is not stopping anytime soon, and there are no silver bullet answers. These are complicated matters, and we are watching that antitrust is required. We are watching that privacy and data protection framework is required. But what we try to do here is let's lump everything together and ask, can government control Twitter or not? Should Twitter follow India's constitution or not? When government itself cannot claim that they are watching India, they are observing what the constitution requires.
I mean, I'll just say the irony is that at this time of this national crisis, someone rightly called this a weapon of mass distraction.
Yeah,
And I think you're right to call it out as public theater because really the country needs to be focusing on so much else, in lives and livelihood, as they say. Thank you, Mishi. Learned a lot from you and hope to have you back soon because, as you said, this dispute isn't ending anytime soon and nor is the story vanishing. So, thank you very much. And to our audience, we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.